Okay, welcome to Site 236, Developmental Psychology. Today we're talking about Chapter 15. It's Adolescence, it's Cognitive Development. Okay, usually the chapter on cognitive development isn't that interesting. In this case it is, because we're talking about adolescence. There are a lot of interesting things about adolescents and how they think. So let's talk about that. This is our overview over here. We're going to get the least interesting thing out of the way first. We're going to talk about Piaget's stage of formal operational thought. Okay, and then after that, we'll talk about logic and self, adolescent egocentrism, school and work. All that stuff that comes after Piaget is interesting. Okay, but yes, during adolescence, we do have to cognitive development. We do talk about Piaget one more time. Okay, so let's talk about Piaget's theory of intellectual development. We're at the stage of development known as adolescence. So we have to talk about the last stage of Piaget's theory of intellectual development. And that is known as the stage of formal operational thought. Okay, it's the fourth and final stage of cognitive development. And according to Piaget, it's characterized by more systematic logic and the ability to think about abstract ideas. Remember, before this, children understood things concretely. They can understand concrete things really well, things that have to do with conservation and things like that. But they didn't have the capacity yet, if they're average at least, they're at that stage, to think about things that are more abstract, okay? Things that they have to imagine, things that involve logic, okay? Think about things systematically. Okay, step by step, things that involve logic, things that they have to imagine, okay? And we mentioned some things before, like democracy, right? Just understanding what logic is in general, or understanding things that are more theoretical, right? They struggle with those kinds of things. There are some examples that have to do with abstract ideas, right? That have to do with math, right? Remember, this is the fourth and final stage of Piaget's theory. So this is the time when children are capable of understanding these abstract ideas. So a lot of adolescent math can be seen as, as abstract. Like when you take algebra or you take calculus, things like that, you encounter things that are abstract, things that have to do with equations and theories, things that you have to imagine. It's no longer just adding, simple numbers that refer to simple concrete things. Now you're dealing with things that you have to imagine, okay, that are more abstract, right? Even things that have to do with social science, right? The relation among people and society and culture and all those things, those are things that have more to do with ideas and things that are abstract, right? Or things that have to do with science, like physics, right? Chemistry. Though they can refer and often do refer to concrete things, a lot of the things about how they operate and what governs the behavior of those things, not really behavior, but the movement of those things, has to do with theories and math that is abstract. So by this time, they become more capable of understanding those things. But of course, there's a lot of variation in children. Some of them, can handle things at a very high level and will go beyond calculus, might even become math majors in the future and have a career in math or in science. Others maybe in the social sciences. Some are capable of understanding some of these things, but they won't be as advanced, okay? So children differ quite a bit. And according to Piaget, not all children even reach this stage. Not all children are actually capable of abstract thought. And we actually have many adults who are not capable of thinking about things abstractly. And they can only think about things that are concrete, things they can see and touch. And we can talk about some of this stuff later on, okay? But yeah, there are people who are just not capable of understanding all that other stuff. And they call you, they say you're a brainiac or you're a nerd or a dork and things like that. And they prefer to deal with just everyday things they can touch, right? And they tease those people who actually do understand this more advanced stuff. Piaget's experiment. So Piaget did this one experiment to see if children can figure out how to balance, a scale over here, or balance this bar with different weights. Of course, where you put the weight on that bar matters for balancing it, okay? If you're dealing with something, if you have two weights, for instance, if you look at the picture, if you have two weights and the weights are the same mass, okay? If you put the weights if the bar is right in the middle of that balancing point, of the pivot point, if you put the weights on opposite ends, right, in equal distance from the middle, they should balance each other. So you can see that these children here are having, some trouble with that. Okay, even though it's not that hard, but this is something that's more related to like physics. It requires a little bit more imagination to figure it out, but not a whole lot. In the image of the kids that are older, below those, so below A and B, when you look at C and D, now you have to balance weights that are, not only on different sides of that pivot point, but are different mass. And you have to figure out the correct way to balance it based on the mass and the distance from that center point, from that pivot point. And you have to use your imagination, okay? And that would require more abstract thought. It's more something like you would have to figure out that's to do with physics, things like that with science, okay? This is an experiment that Piaget did. So he used a balancing task requiring balancing a scale with weights, and skill in logically solving the task improves with age. Children get better at these sort of things with age, right? Because they have to think about it logically. They have to imagine things, and they have to simultaneously consider the distance from the center and the mass. And, like I said, it has to do with things that are more abstract, okay? The point is, Piaget's theory of intellectual development, the last stage is about formal operation. This is when children can finally, think about things that are abstract, things that have more to do with ideas and with using your imagination and considering theories, considering propositions, things like that. Okay, that's the less interesting part of this chapter. Now let's move on to the more interesting part about how adolescents think about their cognitive development. Logic and self, okay. Turns out that adolescents are actually very egocentric, okay? And that means that they are very focused on how they look and how they behave and what they wear, right? Like this picture over here, these girls are in, I don't know if that's cheerleading or the drill team or something like that. Not like I know the difference between all those things, but you can see right in front of the mirror, checking their makeup and their hair, make sure everything is right. And it's not just because they're on the drill team. Adolescents are this way, okay? They're very self-focused, very concerned about their looks, very self-centered, very egocentric. So this adolescent egocentrism means that they think a lot about themselves and not so much about others. So it's characteristic of adolescent thinking that leads young people, usually 10 to 14. It's usually, right before your teenage years to the middle of your teenage years, when you are the most egocentric, okay? So it leads children around this age to focus on themselves to the exclusion of others. And it's very shallow things usually, my looks and my hair and my makeup and the way I dress. And it's not just girls, it's also boys, kids, also males, right? And their hair, they want to look cool and make sure you dress a certain way, wear the right kind of shoes or whatever it is. But this is a bit biased, if you're poor, by the way, you don't have you don't have as much freedom to look however you want, Yeah, you could maybe try to fix your hair a certain way, but if you can't even afford gel, can't afford the clothes you'd like to wear, right, then it's a little bit harder for you to actually focus a lot on your appearance, but you still try to, okay? I remember like when I was growing up, when I was like around this age, maybe 14 or something like that, Arnold Schwarzenegger was very popular. If you know about Arnold Schwarzenegger, he used to be, he's one of the most successful bodybuilders, and he went on to make movies like Terminator and Terminator 2. He was the biggest star back then. And because of that, guess how us teenage boys wanted to be? We wanted to be like him. So we wanted to be buff and have these big muscles, so we would work out, trying to look good, right? Trying to look muscular. And we'd wear these shirts, right? That you call like tank tops, or, that basically where you show your arms. And even though we didn't have much money, we still wanted to be cool. We still wanted to look a certain way, right? We were still very self-focused, very egocentric. And it's very typical of children in this early stage of adolescence, right around the time they start puberty to the middle of their teenage years, right? They're extremely egocentric. They're very self-conscious about their physical appearance, right? It's greatest from 10 to 14, right? Think back when you were this age, right? And how focused you were on your appearance, right? A lot of egocentrism there, but that's kind of the way they are. They focus a lot on how they look and and they want to be cool and popular, and that's the way it is. More about this. This egocentrism leads adolescents to interpret everyone else's behavior as if it were a judgment on them. So that not only are they very focused on themselves, very egocentric, right? They think that everybody's looking at them and that everyone is going to judge them if they look a certain way or wear a certain thing. That is what we call this imaginary audience. The imaginary audience is other people who in an adolescent's egocentric belief are watching and taking note of his or her appearance, ideas, behavior. So there's this idea that everyone's watching you, that everybody cares about what you look like and what you do, right? This belief makes teenagers very self-conscious, right? And the imaginary audience dominates also online. It's also online. Oh, look at this picture of me. Oh, I'm doing this and that. And they want a lot of likes and comments. They think everybody's watching, everybody's noticing. And the reality is most people don't give a damn about what you look like, what you do, what your ideas are. That is the reality. But during this stage, we are so egocentric. We think that there's a spotlight on us. Oh, and if you get a zit on your nose, oh my God, it's the end of the world, right? You got this big zit. You think everybody's just watching you. Everyone's going to think you're ugly and everyone's going to be judging you. Not true, okay? It's just overblown the extent to which you think other people are looking at you. The reality is that adolescents are focused on themselves mostly. And yeah, they do notice other people, but they don't look at you and care about you and judge you as much as you think they do. Okay, you are not on stage. You are not performing for other people, but you act as if you are. More about this. There's also what we call a personal fable when it comes to adolescents. Adolescents, right, have this personal fable. It's an aspect of adolescent egocentrism characterized by an adolescent's belief that his or her thoughts, feelings, or experiences are unique, more wonderful, or awful than anyone else's. So the personal fable is like this great story, that somehow your life is this great story that's very interesting and wonderful, or maybe tragic, that you've experienced so much hardship, so many things, and that your life should be written a book for everybody to read. Everyone could see how interesting and unique you are. Not true. Your story is not that interesting for the most part, and very similar to other people's stories. But it's a thing about, again, about adolescent egocentrism, that they believe this stuff about themselves, that they should all be in the movies, that they should all be written about in books and on the internet. In reality, most of us, not that interesting. Most of us are just normal, okay? I don't know what the picture has to do with this, but it's a picture from the book. It doesn't really seem to match what it's talking about, but that's the personal fable, right? You know, these great stories that everybody's heard about, right? Aesop's fables, or the one of the tortoise and the hare, right? Somehow that your life is so interesting that it should be written about and it should be something that everybody knows about. Your life is not that interesting. It's mostly like everybody else's. There are people whose lives are different. Some are more interesting than others, but you know, it's overblown, okay? Your life is not that interesting. That's the reality. Seems like we're picking adolescents a lot here, but adolescents really are very egocentric. You'll learn through experience when you get older that you actually don't matter as much as you think you do. And it's tough to tell adolescents that, right? Because they're also very moody, can make them depressed. And some of you might feel very sensitive to that kind of information, but that is the reality about life. And as an adolescent, you're very self-focused, very egocentric, and you believe things about yourself that just aren't true. There's also tends to be an invincibility fable, right? An adolescent's egocentric conviction, belief, basically, that is what a conviction is. Conviction, right, that he or she cannot be overcome or even harmed by anything that might defeat a normal mortal person, right? Such as unprotected sex, drug abuse, high-speed driving. Let me explain that. Adolescents live their lives, a lot of them, as if nothing could ever happen to them, right? Some of them will drive too fast, thinking that they're never going to crash, not going to kill themselves, use drugs, thinking that somehow they're not going to be harmed by drugs, have unprotected sex, somehow believing they're not going to get pregnant, not going to get an STD, right? They engage in very risky behavior. They live their lives as if they're invincible, as if they could always hit the reset button and start all over again, or that things are going to be okay. And the reality is that's not the way it is. You can very easily be hurt by riding those damn ATVs, by using those guns, okay? By partying There's criminals around you when you party. Using drugs, it can be very harmful. You can get into serious trouble. But as adolescents, remember when you were around this age, and I'm not talking about maybe 10, 14, but maybe a little bit later, your teenage years, maybe when you're 15, 16, 17, whatever, you're out there, you want to have a good time, you want to party, you want to do all this stuff. And you tend to be irresponsible. Live your life as if you're always going to be young. Nothing's ever going to happen to you. Nothing bad's going to happen. And that is just not true. A lot of people get hurt, people get killed, people get addicted to drugs, people get pregnant, people get abused sexually and physically. But as adolescents, we have a tendency to believe that things are going to be okay. Even when we hear about things going bad for other people, we think that somehow we're the exception and that that's not going to happen to us. That is a typical thing about adolescence. And I remember when I was that way too, I remember, I didn't really use drugs or have unprotected sex. Believe it or not, your structure was mostly a good boy. But I do remember partying and drinking, and every time there was any drinking involved, it would always be a lot of drinking. You have to drink to get drunk, right? You have to have a blast. You always have to overdo things, like somehow like you're invincible. And I do remember one thing, and it's very typical of adolescence, and I think still typical of some of you guys, this belief that somehow you're always going to be young and you're always going to look good. You tend to look better when you're young, but you're not always going to be young. You're going to get older. Your energy is going to go down. You're going to be less capable. And that's just the reality. But adolescents just live their lives as if they're always going to be young, always going to be wonderful, always going to have all this energy and just this, and this lifestyle, so to speak, right? And that's not true. You will get old, you will get ugly, and you just, your life is going to change. Okay, so maybe not ugly. I'm kind of joking there, right? But life is not the way you think it is when you are an adolescent. And that's a dangerous thing, to think that somehow you're invulnerable. We do a lot of stupid things when we're adolescents, thinking that somehow things are not going to go wrong. They're not going to happen to us. And a lot of people end up getting into trouble, end up getting hurt, engage in risky behavior. Okay, let's talk about other things that are also interesting. Okay, that has to do with advances in cognitive development, advances in how adolescents think. Okay, you have to know the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is when you reason from something specific to something general. Okay, that's inductive reasoning. I'll give you an example. It's like, okay, it waddles, it quacks, it has feathers, therefore it's a duck. That's inductive reasoning. Okay, it's also sometimes called bottom-up processing or bottom-up reasoning. Take the little bits from the bottom and build it to reach the general conclusion. It says there that inductive reasoning may be less cognitively advanced than deduction. So it's easier for adolescents to think inductively, right? To reason from specific things to something general, right? That's easier, right? Deductive reasoning is harder and requires more brain development, greater skills of reasoning. Deductive reasoning is the opposite. That's when you reason from something general, and then from the general statement, you derive the specifics. Okay, it would be like this. Okay, so you see a duck, and because it's a duck, therefore it waddles, right? Therefore it has feathers, it has a beak. That's deductive reasoning, to give you a simple example. It's also called top-down processing or top-down reasoning. And it's a bit more of an advanced form of thinking than inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is more advanced than inductive reasoning. Okay, and this matters because it has to do with how adolescents think. For instance, when it comes to the topic of racism, okay, for instance, children think about racism and they reason inductively that some people are prejudiced, that some people, argue with one another and don't like each other and that kind of stuff, right? Yeah, you hear about people in the news, someone who did this awful thing, this bad thing, and children reason, okay, so there's some bad people out there, there's some racist people out there. That's how they think, but they don't see the big picture, okay? Adolescents are more likely to see the big picture. They think deductively that racism is society-wide, that it's a systemic issue, right? That's what we call systemic racism, that it's widespread. And they think about policy solution, that racism basically has to do with just, the way our society is, our elections, the people we elect, our education, our economics, our politics, our health. Racism is systemic. It is everywhere. It exists because of the way society is set up. That is a higher level argument to make, requires more deductive reasoning, and that is actually the truth about racism. It's a societal problem. It's systemic. Now, those people who argue, oh yeah, we have a few bad apples here and there, but oh no, it's just, there's no real problem with society. We don't need to make any changes. Those people are thinking like children, okay? Those people don't see the big picture, or they're biased, or refuse to, or they're blind for whatever reason because they don't want to see the big picture. But reality is, it's a widespread problem. It is systemic. It is societal. It has to do with the way our society is structured. And we need to make improvements and change that so that racism is less common. Okay, adolescents are better able to get that argument than children, which reminds me of those politicians that think like children, who deny that it is systemic, that it is society-wide, right? They're in denial, or they're just lying to you because they don't want to change. They don't want to change the rules or the way things are because it benefits them. Okay, but that's an example of deductive reasoning. When you see it as a widespread kind of general thing, more about the big picture, the societal picture, not just like there's a few here, right? And racism exists, right? That's inductive reasoning. That's lower level reasoning. Let's keep going before I get too excited talking about that stuff, right? Because it is an election year after all. All right, other things about how adolescents think. There's adolescents basically have this kind of dual processing. There's kind of this dual processing when it comes to thinking, okay? There is intuitive thought versus analytic thought, okay? Intuitive thought is when your thought is driven by an emotion, how you feel about something, right? Or a hunch, I have this gut feeling that this is how things are, right? Beyond a rational explanation, it's not really rational. Beyond is not really the right word there, but it's not really rational. It's more an emotional thing. It's a hunch. It's a gut feeling, right? It is influenced by past experience and cultural assumptions. So you've been taught, for instance, that that certain people are good people and certain people are bad people, and it's part of your culture that you like this kind of music or you like this kind of thing, And so your thinking can be more intuitive, right? When it comes to making decisions about who's going to be your friend or what kind of things you're going to do with yourself, it's more about, when you're an adolescent, it's actually more intuitive, right? It's more about how things feel, right? It's more about emotion, feeling good, right? This hunch, you have this gut feeling, yeah, this would be cool, that kind of thinking for adolescents. It's less rational. It's not so much about thinking about the pros and cons and that kind of stuff. It is not rational. It is intuitive. It's more emotional. That kind of thinking, more typical of adolescence. Analytic thought is something that adolescents have to work on a little bit more, and they'll get better at as they get older. But analytic thought involves more analysis, where it's a systemic ranking of the pros and cons. You have to think about, if I do this, these are the bad things that can happen, and these are the good things that can happen, right? You have to analyze things, weigh the risks and consequences, right? If I drink, right, what can happen? Okay, well, I'm underage. I'm not legally able to drink. What can happen, right? What are the consequences? What are some of the good things that can happen? We have to think of the possibilities, the facts, right? You have to take all that into consideration. Analytic thought depends on logic and rationality, okay? You have to think more intelligently, right? Not just go with your emotion or your gut, right? It's an election year. Guess what? Don't just go with groups and emotions and guts because you don't like certain people. Read the issue, okay? And think about it intelligently, rationally. Be analytic in your decision making, and you'll be much better off. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. Adolescents, right? Pretty much all adolescents. And I was the same way. Oh, you would love to have a nice car, wouldn't you, right? An awesome car with a lot of horsepower that's fast, a Ferrari or something like that. You would love that. You can't afford that probably, right? Unless you're super rich, but you would love that, right? That's that intuitive thought, right? But if you think about that rationally, you shouldn't want that damn car. It's very expensive. Even if you could afford it, it's dumb to throw away that kind of money on a stupid car that, by the way, years from now is going to be worthless. That's analytic thought, right? The pros and cons, guess what? More on maintenance, more on insurance. It gets worse gas mileage. It's not necessarily safer or more reliable than other cars. That is analytic thought. which is why now that I'm older and I can't afford nice things, I can't afford a Ferrari, okay? But now that I'm older and I can't afford a nicer car, right? A really badass car if I wanted to, I still won't buy a car like that because I know it's a stupid thing to do when you think about it logically, right? Because now I think more analytically, not like a teenager. When I was a teenager, oh yeah, I wanted that BMW, I wanted that Mercedes. I couldn't even afford any freaking car, let alone a Mercedes or a BMW. Now I think about it, say these are just overpriced cars with a stupid badge. You're paying for the stupid name. It's no better than a freaking Toyota or a Honda or something like that, which is what I do drive, okay? No better, right? You think more analytically now, right? When you're older, and you develop that as you become an adolescent. But adolescents are more intuitive. Adolescents prefer more emotions, right? Rational judgment is kind of difficult for them because they're very egocentric. Their egocentric emotions dominate. So they want that cool car. They want those cool clothes, right? They want to wear their hair a certain way, right? Very egocentric, right? They don't want to necessarily work hard, right? They want to party, right? That's the preferring emotions thing, right? So, but the experience when it comes to their decision making, making decisions, and thinking about things will facilitate more accurate analysis. As they get older with more experience, right, they'll get better at thinking rationally and less emotionally, less intuitively, okay? You need to think about rewards and reasons as well. The reasons why these things happen. A lot of it has to do with biology here. The explanation here has to do with biology. When you're an adolescent, the cortical regions of your brain, okay? Cortical means has to do with the cortex, okay? So the higher level areas of your brain, the ones that control your impulses, control your emotions, that are ones involved in planning, like the prefrontal cortex, they mature through early adulthood. So they continue to mature and continue to evolve, so to speak. And your prefrontal cortex is the last part of your brain to fully develop. And that is the part of your brain that allows you to stop and think and not do stupid things and control your emotions, right? It's not fully developed until you're about 19, early 20s, according to some research. And here as an adolescent, you are not that old yet. So it's the subcortical regions, the regions below the cortex that are less advanced and that allow less advanced thinking, things that have to do with emotional novelty, with things that are emotional, things that are new, things that look cool, right? And rewards, right? Things that make you feel good, right? Those areas of the brain are more responsive in middle adolescence. During adolescence, those areas of your brain are more fully formed. The limbic system, right? Which is an emotional, which is a whole collection of brain areas that is responsible for emotional behavior, like fear and aggression, the amygdala, right? The hypothalamus, which is involved with the fear, fight or flight response. Those part of the brains that have to do with the limbic system, subcortical regions, are actually more fully developed and are the reason why adolescents are so emotional, right? Why they are less rational and more emotional, and they do stupid things, and they engage in sensation seeking, engage in risky behavior to find that thrill, right? To feel good, right? It's because their brain is not fully developed yet. The front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is not fully developed. That's the part that makes you think like a responsible adult. The other parts, the limbic system, makes you behave more like an animal. Hey, let's party, dude. Let's have fun. Hey, you know, you're mad. Let's kick somebody's ass, right? You're scared. Let's run away, right? That's emotional. And adolescents behave more emotionally. Okay, they're more emotional in their thinking and their behavior. Other things that have to do with adolescent cognitive development, digital natives. A lot of adolescents nowadays, or most adolescents, are what we call digital natives. In other words, they have grown up with technology. Okay. The smartphone has been particularly important in creating digital natives. Even among those that are, low SES students, low socioeconomic status, even those that are poor nowadays, and every ethnic group nowadays has these smartphones, at least here in the US. Seems like everybody has a smartphone. There are some people that don't, by the way. I do have students that don't have a smartphone, right? I do have some students like that, but there's only a few of them. Most people nowadays have the internet, they have smartphone, they are connected to the internet. They have the internet at their fingertips. So they are digital natives. They're growing up with technology. And by the way, you guys have kids, or actually my kids now growing up are even more so these digital natives. They're not just growing up with technology. They're growing up with that from the very beginning. There was never a time for them when social networking didn't exist, when the internet didn't exist. A very different reality for them. They're growing up in this different world. You guys, you know, late teens, early 20s are also digital natives. You grew up with the internet and computers and stuff like that. And now we have smartphones and, you know, there's more technology, right? So, you know, you're growing up in a different world. And this will affect how you think, okay, by the way, the access to information, all those things. There are discrepancies in the number of quality of devices. Yes, if you're that follow SES lines. SES stands for socioeconomic. So those people who have more money, who are a little bit more richer, right? They will have the more higher end devices, the Apple devices, right? You know, the bigger ones, the ones with more memory, the ones with better features, you know, that are like $1,000 or more, okay? The ones that are lower SES, they may not have the Apple devices, or they may have another brand that's cheaper, right? There are cheaper brands, don't have as good features. There are smartphones out there that, you know, I don't know what the cheapest one would be, but I'm pretty sure that there are some that maybe cost about $150, close to $100 around there, a smartphone where you can access the internet and stuff like that. Not as good as maybe an iPhone or the Samsung one, whatever it's called, right? But there are others, and smartphones, the internet, all that stuff, social networking, all that stuff is just readily accessible nowadays. The most notable digital divide is age. We talk about the digital divide. The digital divide has to do with the division between those that have access to technology and the internet and all that stuff, and those that don't. The most digital divide now is age. It used to be in the past that people who were richer had access to this technology and people who were poor did not. Now things have changed, right? All the different economic groups kind of have access to technology, some more than others, of course, but they all have access now. But when it comes to age, there's a big difference. What that means is that older people are at a big disadvantage when it comes to technology. Older people that did not grow up with the internet, with computers, let alone these smartphones, right? They're not used to this stuff. They don't want a smartphone. They don't know how to use the damn thing, know how to use the internet. Not talking about all old people, but when you're talking about an older population, there will be less of them that are familiar and that are comfortable with all this technology. And you see in our class here, we're using Zoom here. I use Canvas, I use technology, not a whole ton of it. Actually, I do use a lot of technology, believe it or not, but there's people who use a lot more than I do, right? But because of this, my class is better for people who are younger, and people who are a little bit older. Some of them can struggle a little bit more because it's a different reality nowadays. There's more technology, and you're expected to know how to use it and how to think when you use this technology. How does technology affect cognition? How does technology affect how you think? Well, technology is both good and bad. Technology can speed up education during the adolescent year, right? Quicker access, more convenient access to books and journal articles, to information, right? You can learn a lot more. Everything's at your fingertips. You want to learn something, look it up, okay? If your instructor sucks, doesn't do a good job of teaching math or English or whatever it is, if you know what you're doing, you can go to the internet and you can watch YouTube videos on how to write a good paper, how to basically, how to do math, how to do calculus. Just about everything is on the internet, but you have to be smart about how you access things. Not everything is credible, okay? So technology can be a good thing, okay? It may also subvert some kinds of learning. It might be bad for some kinds of learning or learning processes. Things have to do with reflection, analytic thinking. It turns out that access to all this technology, right, the internet and all this information is actually changing how people think. It's actually making people less analytical. What's happening is people go on the internet and they look for the kind of things that that support their opinions and what they already believe. And they find evidence for what they believe, and they're not really looking at the other side. They're not really thinking critically. They're still just being emotional, you know? So let's say, for instance, when it comes to like, believing in, let's say, whether you think that issues like, let's say, that have to do whether, the whole issue about abortion, right? Pro-choice, pro-life, right? Guess what? If you are one or the other, you're going to look up stuff on the internet that supports your point of view. And you're going to be fed information that supports your point of view. And you're going to think more and more that somehow you're right and other people are wrong. When in reality, you might be on the wrong damn side, okay? And you might be backward, and you might be the kind of person who's just behind the times, so to speak. Just like people used to be behind the times on slavery, right? Where there were people who believed that, yeah, slavery is okay, nothing wrong with it. A lot of people believe that. And other people who said, no, this is wrong, this whatever it is, right? On the wrong side of progress is what I'm saying. The internet, especially when you watch YouTube, it's mostly feeding you stuff that you already agree with and reinforcing what you believe. And what you believe may be wrong. And that's the thing, that no longer is information now controlled by just those that are educated, like your teachers and scientists and researchers who know what they're talking about. But any numbskull can make a YouTube video or have a website where they're claiming this and that, and they're no experts. They don't know what they're talking about, and they mislead a lot of people. Those YouTube videos, they can educate you, right? There's people who really know how to do math and how to write, and you can learn some really useful things, but you can also learn some very bad things, right? You can learn hate and anti-Semitism and racism and all this crap. Where do you think that people get these ideas about, that lead them to go and shoot up schools? And they get these hateful ideas. And the reason why we're so divided nowadays is because we have so much access to information, and we're being fed information that just basically that we already believe, that just reinforces, our own kind of stupid ways of thinking. We have to think about the whole picture. We have to be analytical. And instead, we're thinking just like teenagers, thinking emotionally, and we're being fed things that just already basically fall in line with our beliefs. And it's a problem, right? And you'll hear, when some young adult, some adolescent, shoots up a school, you'll hear the parents say, we didn't teach him that stuff. I don't know where he got those ideas. This stuff about wanting to join the KKK or this racist views, we didn't raise them that way. You know where they got that from? From the internet, from YouTube and other stuff, right? That's the problem with the internet, right? That the content is created by anybody. And you can be led to some very bad ideas, some very bad ways of thinking, okay? Because information is no longer just controlled by teachers and educators and scientists and research, people who know what the hell they're talking about. Now there's everybody out there claiming this and that, and it's a big problem. And I'm not saying we need to censor the internet, but you need to use the internet intelligently. You need to know what's credible and what's not credible. And we also learned that in school, by the way, in college. And I've taught you some of that already about credible sources. And YouTube is not considered credible, although you can find things that'll teach you how to do things in there. But it doesn't mean that you can use it as a source for like your paper, okay? Other things about technology and cognition, social networks, right? Things like Facebook, Twitter. I mean, now there's TikTok, there's all these things. And what kind of is popular kind of changes over the years, okay? Social networks, adolescent cognitive growth can benefit their shared experiences and opinions. Just like technology in general, social networks can be good and bad, okay? So people can benefit from sharing their experiences, their opinions, from talking about things. They find support for themselves. Someone who might be lonely, might be a loner without the internet, can find friends on the internet and can connect with people. Often communication via the internet can bolster fragile self-esteem. Someone who has low self-esteem and thinks that there's other people aren't like that. Somehow they're different, that that they're ugly, or they're this or that, or whatever it is that you believe about yourself that's bad. You can find people like yourself on the internet who will tell you that's not true. You are actually okay. You're just like us. You're different. It's okay, right? It can be good in that way. It's like you find friends, right? Are they real friends though? That's the thing. It's only online. Adolescents sometimes share personal information on the internet without thinking about the consequences. That's another problem, is that they often don't think about the consequences when they share this information. Who are you sharing it with? Are those people who they claim they are, right? And they can also fall victim to cyberbullying, right? People insult each other and spread rumors about each other online. Cyberbullying is spreading of insults or rumors about another by means of social media posts, emails, text messages, cell phone videos, right? These teenagers are not just bullying each other now in person, they bully each other online. You post a picture and they tell you you're ugly. They tell you that, that you suck or whatever it is, and they bully each other online. That can contribute to dangerous self-destructive behavior. Teenagers get depressed, they get all bummed out. Remember, they think really emotionally, right? And they need to think about the fact that people online are not necessarily being truthful. So sometimes they're just teasing you, or sometimes they're just being mean and they're being assholes or whatever it is. And that not everybody's like that, and that you're really not ugly, right? That you're really not that bad. But it can really hurt and damage these teenagers. Their fragile self-esteem, their fragile egos, because they are very egocentric. You have to be aware of this. Anonymity often brings out the worst in people. People will post all kinds of bad things just to mess with you sometimes. Hateful things, racist things, all kinds of things. And you have to be aware of that. That is cyberbullying. And I see a lot of that online, especially when it comes to political stuff. Somebody posts something about, vote for this president or that president. And what happens is that people jump all over each other and are cussing each other out, saying mean things about each other based on which side they're on. And you see a lot of this stupid behavior online, because it's like we're all anonymous. I mean, we do have a name or a username, some of that, but it doesn't have to be a real name. But we're all on there, and it brings out the worst in us, because people don't necessarily know who we are. A lot of people don't, or whatever it is. And it's just a very bad thing, a very bad situation. But social networking can also be good. Like I said, you can also find friends and find support, but you have to be aware that there is this other bad aspect of it, okay? And you and keep in mind, you could also end up sharing personal information for people who want to harm you, not just online, for people who might want to convince you to meet with them in person, and then they rape you, assault you, kidnap you, whatever it is. You have to be aware of that stuff as well. More about technology and sex. I feel like maybe I'm going too slow because I'm getting into this too much. Okay, sexting, okay, is a problem as well. Sexting is when basically, when people, and it's not just teenagers, but teenagers do it a lot. Also young adults, people who are older who should know better. Sexting is when they basically send photos of themselves, that are in sexual, right? Naked pictures of themselves or videos, As many as 30% of adolescents report receiving sexting photos, unsolicited pictures, right? Of somebody, of a naked picture of someone, right? Or you send a naked picture of yourself to someone because you want them to like you, right? And I can't believe people do this, right? Like guys will send a picture of their penis to a girl, say, hey, look at my penis. Don't you want to be with me? Right? Can you imagine that? Right? Or girls sending naked pictures of themselves, right? It varies a lot depending on which school you're at, gender, ethnicity, right? And also, it also differs, depending on attitude. But this is dangerous, okay? The pictures may be forwarded without the naked person's knowledge. Your pictures that you are sharing, right, with this person that you think you're only sharing with this person could easily and often do end up on the internet. And they share it with others. If you're lucky, they'll only share it with their friends, but very often they can also end up posting them on the internet. Senders who deliberately send erotic self-images, when you do this stuff, send images about yourself, right? Videos, whatever it is, you risk serious depression if the reaction is not what was wished, all right? You thought that it would somehow endear you to this person, like you show them how good looking you are, and you show them a new photo so that they would like you and then would ask you out, and instead they make fun of you and say you have a big ass or something like that, or that you're ugly or fat or whatever it is. And then you get depressed and you feel all bummed out and you get suicidal. You imagine these adolescents, how they feel when that happens, and it happens a lot, or ends up being shared with their friends or on the internet. It's awful. Don't do that. I can't believe people do that. And it's not just adolescents, by the way. Even adults, right? Yeah, I mean, are doing that stuff. Even, senators and congressmen have been caught doing that stuff. Can you believe that? Sending a picture of their penis, right? It's unimaginable, right? But that's what's happening. It's a dumb thing to do. Okay, don't do it, right? Let's talk about middle school. Okay, so you're an adolescent. This is frequently a time when you enter middle school, right? Some things about middle school. So middle school is actually a difficult time for adolescents. Okay, middle school, right? The first year in a new school, whether it's middle school, high school, or college, is actually difficult. Okay, it takes some adjusting. Okay, so first year in any new school, particularly middle school, correlates with increased bullying, decreased achievement, more depression, right? And even eating disorders. Remember, before this, you were a kid. You were in elementary school. It was different. Now you're in middle school with a bunch of other adolescents. and they're more egocentric. They can be mean. There's more bullying, and your achievement can go down because they bully you and they make you feel worse about yourself, decrease your motivation. Or maybe there's less achievement because now you want to be cool and you want to be popular rather than paying attention to what you're actually doing in school, right? I've seen many people go down that road. Okay, it's a difficult time for adolescents. You transitioning from one school to another affects the ability to learn, the ability to function and learn. Okay, changing schools when your growth spurt is occurring, right? When you're developing these sexual characteristics, right, is bound to create stress. It's stressful, right? Adjusting to a new school, a new format, new people, right? Now you have different teachers, different periods, right? Rather than one teacher all day long, right? Student-teacher ratio is not favorable. Now there may be 40 students in the class, not those small classes that you had in elementary school, right? Now you don't matter that much, it seems, right? And you have more teachers. You don't spend the whole day with the teachers. You get less individual attention, right? And at the same time, you're very egocentric, very self-focused. And then there's a bunch of other people like you who are also very self-focused and egocentric. And these adolescents can also be mean. So it's a very stressful time, difficult time for adolescents, which may lead to a decrease in achievement. They maybe were good students, and during middle school, that tends to drop for a lot of people, and they may all of a sudden not be so good at, might not be doing so well. Finding acclaim, obtaining those rewards, is more difficult in middle school. There's a mismatch between egocentrism and changing school structure, right? At a time when you want more attention, when you're more self-focused, you actually get less attention. Now you have more teachers, right? There's more students in your class, right? And you are just one out of many, okay? And that's harmful, okay? So it's harder for you to get that attention. It's harder for you to compete, so to speak, because you don't get so much individualized attention anymore, right? Whether you want to do well in school, or let's say you want people to think you're good looking or athletic or whatever it is, there's a whole bunch of other people, and they're not necessarily going to notice you. Public acclaim is difficult when many students seek peer acceptance, right? You want your peers to accept you, think you're good looking or this or that. It's harder when you're older. There's more competition. There's tougher competition. There's more people. The school is usually bigger with more students. In elementary school, you might have been big fish in a small pond, so to speak. And now you're a little fish in a big pond. Put it to you this way, okay? When I was in elementary school, I was athletically, I was okay. I was like the second fastest kid in my school. We had our races, we had our junior Olympics, right? Get to junior high, right? Yeah, I'm still athletic. I'm still all right, good enough to make the track team, but nowhere near being near the top, right? And maybe you were a good student, right? You think you were a brainiac, right? You're very smart. You get to middle school, right? And all of a sudden, you find out that you're actually not as smart as you thought you were, right? That you're doing okay, but there's a bunch of students doing much better than you. Even competitive athletic teams may be too difficult for children with fragile egos, right? You thought you were good enough for this team or that team, or to compete or whatever, and you find out that you're not. It's tougher. As you get older, the competition gets tougher. Elementary school, the kids aren't even that developed. Sure, you can do well there. It doesn't mean that you're going to be that good later on, okay? But junior high, and more kids are more fully developed. They'll be faster, stronger. You're going to compete with these kids athletically, right? And then you get to high school, and the competition is even more fierce. And while you thought you were good enough to make the team or going off to go to college and get the MBA, all of a sudden you find out you're not even good enough for the team, right? Same thing academically can happen. You thought you were smart. Turns out you're not as smart as you thought you were. Competition gets tougher as you get older, and it starts in middle school. More about middle school. Coping with middle school. How do you cope with this, right? Let's say that when it comes to intelligence, let's say you're struggling or not doing as well as you would like. There is an entity approach to intelligence and an incremental approach. The entity approach is when you believe ability, and it doesn't have to be with intelligence, it could be with athletics as well and other things. But the entity approach means that you believe that your ability is innate, it's inborn, it's biological, right? You can't do anything about it. You reject the idea that effort enhances achievement. So in other words, you were either born smart or you weren't. You were either born to be a track superstar or a star athlete, or you were not. That's just the way it is. And by the way, in the US, we believe that a lot, that it's somehow a gift, it's a talent, something you were born with, right? That's how people are that achieve success. It's more useful to believe in an incremental approach to intelligence, or incremental approach, not just to intelligence, but athletics and even other things, where you believe that your efforts can be enhanced, can be increased, okay, that you can do better with increased effort. You can get smarter if you work harder and you read more and you try harder and you get a better education. You can become more athletic and get better if you practice more, right? You can get better at basketball, become faster, right? And be more likely to be able to compete well on the track team, right? Do you believe that? Effort matters a lot. And you know who believes more in the incremental approach, right? Asian people, and it suits them very well. Asian Americans or places in China, right? They don't buy into this baloney about like, hey, you're either born that way or you're not. It's like, I don't give a damn what you think. You work hard and you get that damn A and you go on to college and you become successful, right? They really believe in effort and working hard. Here in the US, not as much. Here in the US, we believe like, oh, so-and-so is a brainiac, all right? Oh, lucky him, he was born smart, right? No, you can get smart too, okay? You can work hard and get better. There's plenty of smart people who are lazy, that if you work hard enough, you can do better than they do, okay? It's good if you're smart and you work hard, right? Entity means you believe that's just the way it is. You can't do anything about it. Incremental means that your effort can enhance it, right? That you can get better. And it's better to believe that you can get better, right? Especially in middle school, when the competition gets tougher, time for you to toughen up and work harder rather than just give up and get all bummed out and depressed. And then you enter high school, right? The problems of middle school continue, during high school. Okay, yes, the competition will get even tougher. Okay, coaches will be tougher. Teachers will expect more. Okay, it'll be even harder for you to stand out, for you basically to find that you're, important or good looking. Hey, there's going to be a lot of competition in looks. Thought you were good looking, right? Hey, wait till you get to high school and you'll see how you stack up next to all those other people who are also fully developed or close to being fully developed at this point and attractive. Okay, academics, all that stuff, athletics, right? Everything becomes tougher. Teachers assume that when you get to high school, especially for those that are college bound, teachers often assume that you've mastered formal thinking already, that you're able to think logically and analytically, instead of teaching you how to do it. A lot of teachers, right, when you take their class, they assume that you're prepared, that you're ready, and you may not be ready. And it's their job to make sure you are ready and to backtrack if they need you, to make you be more capable of learning what they're supposed to teach you, right? But they're supposed to provide that instead of you going there like, what the hell's wrong with you? You're supposed to know this already. And then, instead of teaching you, they just complain about you and they don't teach you the stuff. They just expect you to know it. That's a problem with a lot of teachers, where they just expect you to know something, be able to do it, rather than teaching you how to do it. Your research paper, I'm going to teach you guys, I'm going to show you guys how to do it, rather than just telling you to do it. I know in a lot of classes, they just tell you, hey, on this day, you have this paper due, right? This kind of paper. Now go do it. I'm going to actually show you how to do it. Okay. There's also increased, there's more classes that are assessed by externally scored exams that do not necessarily measure college readiness. There's a typo there. What I mean is that there's more of these standardized tests, right? There's the AP test. When you take AP classes, there's the SAT test, achievement test, and all these things, right? That are supposed to determine if you're ready for college, right? But in reality, don't often have anything to do with what you're learning in your class, or don't have that much to do. You'd be surprised when you take those tests, right? And then you don't do really well. Usually what that means is your teacher didn't do a good job preparing you. Okay, yeah, I remember learning calculus and all that stuff. And sure, I passed the AP exam. I think I got a 3 or something like that out of 5 in the AP exam. But I should have gotten a damn 5. Okay, I was really good at math. But the way they teach us, right, especially when you come from some ghetto neighborhood, right, a poor neighborhood, that a lot of people consider ghettos, right? It's a bad way to refer to neighborhoods, I know, but that's what they call it, right? How people call it outside of academia. But they basically teach to the lowest denominator, right? They teach you stuff but they don't really expect that you're going to do that well. They don't really think you're that smart. So they kind of dumb it down. And then you take the AP exam or the SAT or something, then you realize you're not well prepared, right? Because of their expectations, right? They don't think you're that capable. In 2016, AP classes were taken by about 1/3 of all high school students. It was only about 19% in 2003. So more and more people are taking college level classes and taking those AP exams. And if you go to a school in a poor neighborhood, chances are it's not a good school. Your teachers, some of them are good, some of them are not, but chances are you could probably do better. US high school dropout rate, just want to mention very quickly that has been decreasing, the dropout rate for Latinos. For Latinos, it used to be really high, the dropout rate, like in the, in the 90s, right? And when I was going to school, a lot of people dropping out, right? It was lower for African Americans, for white people and Asians, but you can see how it's gone down over the years. They really did a lot to bring down the dropout rate, okay? So a lot more people graduating from high school, okay? And that's good. Let's talk about other things, alternatives to college. Not everyone goes to college, right? More and more people need to go to college nowadays to get a good job, but not everybody goes to college. About 30% of US high school students that graduate do not go on to college. And going on to college doesn't mean you're going to get a degree. A lot of them don't get degrees, but about 30% of them decide that they're not going to go to bother with college or anything, okay? About 37% of US students earn a BS degree 10 years after at least 10 years after graduation. So yeah, you can earn a BS degree or a bachelor's degree 4 years after you graduate from high school, right? If you do it right, if you follow the schedule, so to speak. But sometimes, you know, you fall behind or you fail here and there, you drop out, you start again. So 10 years later, about 37% of US students have earned a BS degree. So out of the 70% that went on to college or that tried college, and that includes community college, by the way, and four-year colleges, right? Only about 37% of them have a degree by that time, 10 years later. So for some, vocational education, right, is more appropriate. Vocational education is geared toward preparation, right? Preparation that is not necessarily something that has to do with academics, but vocational education geared toward preparation is advised by some. Some people are better off seeking something vocational, learning a trade, for instance, learning how to weld, learning some carpentry, or some mechanics or something like that. And the college, even here, does provide those kind of opportunities, right? There are classes you can take where they teach you that stuff. You can learn gardening, you can learn welding, you can learn auto mechanics. They even have higher level stuff. You can actually learn how to fabricate airplanes. We have that's actually a bachelor's degree that's provided. That we have a bachelor's program, believe it or not. It's called aircraft fabrication and assembly, where you can learn basically, you know, how to fix and build planes, you know. But that's a more of a BA. But those are more technical kind of jobs or things that have more to do with things you do with your hands. Okay, vocational stuff. It's very useful for some people, and you can still make a decent living if you take on those kind of jobs and you get that kind of preparation. If you are certified and you get the degree or the certificate that means you're good at this and you go get a good job, you can still make a decent living. However, I will tell you that you'll make a better living if the place where you go work, if they allow you to join a union. If there's a union, you'll have a better salary than if it's non-union. If it's non-union, that means they're gonna keep your wages down. If it's union, that means you have a union that fights for your wages and your work conditions and things like that. And usually that means you're better off and will have a better pay and better conditions, as opposed to them just working you to death and not paying you much, right? Yes, unions work. They work for people, okay? Here at the college where I work, we have a union, okay? And that's the reason we have decent pay, decent salaries, and decent benefits. If we didn't, by the way, we would probably be making 15 bucks an hour. That's the reality, okay? And 15 bucks an hour nowadays doesn't give you much. They're arguing that should be the minimum wage and trying to raise it to 15 bucks an hour. But if you're educated, you have a bachelor's degree, a master's, a PhD, you should make much more than that, right? And we have good jobs at the college because, you know, we do have a union, right? And we do fight for better pay and conditions, stuff like that. If we didn't have those protections, okay, it would be much worse, trust me, okay? Working outside of school, okay, what about those students who work outside of school, right? They're going to school, let's say high school, middle school, and they decide that they're also going to work. They want to make some money. For the most part, these adolescents will take boring dead-end jobs, okay? You're going to end up working at McDonald's, at Subway, at the mall, or something like that. You're not going to usually have some really cool job, okay? You're going to do those kind of jobs that people don't want to do, that don't pay very much and don't really give good benefits, okay? And it's not just, by the way, students and young people who take these jobs nowadays. Now even adults and grown-ups have these jobs and trying to raise a family with these jobs, which is why people are arguing that they need to be higher wage jobs now. You can't keep paying people $7 an hour, even for these jobs. It's just not enough. Okay, why do students do this? Why do they work while they're going to school? Because they believe that work brings money. They want money. Parents might allow you to do it because they say, well, it's good for you to work. It teaches you responsibility. It teaches you the value of money. The reality is different though. Seniors in high school who work, regardless of how many hours they work, they have lower grades. They study less because they're busier, okay? They have poor relations with their parents and their friends. They're not around as much. They have other responsibilities and their relationships suffer with their parents and their friends. They're more likely to use gateway drugs, more likely to use drugs in general because they spend more time away from parents. And now they're going to have more money for drugs. Girls especially are more likely to be sexually active. More time away from parents, more time away from the home, more time for you, easier time for you to hook up with somebody or meet someone that you get involved with, and easier for you to have sex somewhere and your parents are not watching you. Working outside of school. Okay, so other realities about work. Research shows that the money earned during adolescence is not spent on necessities, right? It's not that most of the time that you end up buying things, that you really need. Research shows that mostly what adolescents do with this money is they buy themselves more clothes or nicer clothes, or they spend the money on entertainment, right? Going out and partying, or they buy themselves a car, or they buy drugs, right? Mostly they don't use the money for good things, like saving it to go to college, okay? Or helping out their family. Some of them do, yeah. But a lot of them, research shows that basically they just spend the money on frivolous things, clothes, entertainment, cars, drugs, right? There is a cultural difference when it comes to work and school, right? In Japan, the common belief, and it's not just Japan, Asian people in general, the common belief is the obligation of the adolescent is to study, not to work or do chores. Asian Americans, Asian people in general, they're more likely to just want their students to go to school, focus on school, work hard, and basically get good grades. Never mind the stuff about working. That's my job, right? You go to school and you try as hard as you can to do well. Here in the US, we believe that going to school, working at the same time is actually a good thing. But in reality, it may not be such a good thing after all. But some people have to do it because, they have to help out the family. That's it, you guys. That's where I'll stop. And yeah, I've been talking too much. So I'm going to end this recording.